Hey guys, I'm going to share my lupus journey with you. It's over an extended period of time because lupus is often misdiagnosed because of its vague set of symptoms: fevers, nausea, vomiting, weight loss, body aches, extreme fatigue. You know, sounds like the flu. So that's often what it gets treated as, especially if you've been healthy all your life. Well, in 2007, when I was 21, getting ready to turn 22, I was working at a gas station, standing on my feet 50 or 60 hours a week. I didn't think anything about it. I was 21. And one day I went home after a shift, and my right ankle was swollen, just on the side by my heel. It was like a little pocket, but it hurt. So I told my mom about it, and trusting my mom, she said, we're just going to keep an eye on it. You're probably standing too much, or you're leaning on that side. And we iced it down and watched it. Well, it kept getting bigger, and it started to go on to my left ankle. Well, by that time, we made an appointment with my family doctor, and they did blood work, of course, and nothing really was off by too much, but my kidney function, my creatinine, which is in the kidneys to determine function, to help determine function, and it was high. So I was referred to a nephrologist, and this nephrologist took more blood from me than I'd ever had taken in my life, and did a 24-hour urine collection, which was really gross, but it had to be done. And when those results came back, he diagnosed me with nephrotic syndrome, which is a syndrome where your filters in your kidneys that help filter waste out of the body and unneeded vitamins and minerals swell up. And so I was put on a god amount of prednisone for my age, like 100 milligrams a day. And in a matter of probably 2.5 or 3 weeks, my face mooned out and I blew up like a blimp. And, that's not good for the image of a 21-year-old. But I figured, it's going to save my life. It'll be all right. Well, everything, after about 6 months of prednisone, it was back to normal. And he told me I had a 25% chance of this disease coming back in my life. Okay, well, that's really good odds. So everything was all fine and great until 2010. And I was working at a pizza place. I started having a lot of anxieties. I started feeling tired a lot. And I got a sinus infection. Nothing unusual. Those are typical. So I started taking over-the-counter medicine for it, since I didn't have any insurance. That didn't work. It just kept getting worse and worse, and then I got an ear infection to go with it. I didn't think anything about that, because those usually go hand in hand, and I'd had a few of those before. Well, I didn't have insurance, like I said, so it was home remedies for that. It didn't go away. Well, I stopped working at the pizza place and started working at a factory where I was surrounded by chemicals, and it was very hot in there all the time, and my symptoms had subsided. So I thought, hey, I took care of this. I got this. Did the best I could without having any assistance. Well, in August of 2010, I was working my line 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I got off work, and the entire front of my shirt was covered in sweat. Like I was like a man that had just come out of the gym wearing a gray shirt. It was gross. And I was dizzy. I was weak. I wasn't real sure what was going on, so I went back to where I was staying, and I had just gotten my insurance approved through that company. So I drove 45 minutes to my familiar hospital, and they did a couple blood tests, and they're like, oh, everything's normal, but your potassium's a little bit low. Tossed me a couple of potassium pills and sent me on my way. Great, you know? Well, as the months went on, every day I was deteriorating. My hair started to thin out. I was losing weight. Anything I would eat came up. My urine was progressively getting darker. It was an amber color, like an orange color. And by November, it looked like someone had just poured a can of Coke into the toilet water. I mean, obviously, I'm working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, so I don't have time to really pay attention. I just kind of figured I was around chemicals and I was in an environment I wasn't used to. So, whatever. Well, I stopped working at the factory and got hired on at another pizza place as management. That lasted 8 days because I would go in and I'd have to take a drink of ice cold water about every 10 minutes to keep myself from passing out. I was freezing to death. I had no idea why, because it was still fairly warm for an Indiana November. But something wasn't right, and I knew it at this point. But I'd lost my insurance through the factory, so I was not going to spend thousands of dollars just to be told, you're not eating enough. Well, I had got off work that night, and I went home. And the next day, I had to call into work. I just couldn't do it. I was so weak, and I was pale with bright red face. No idea what was going on. I just figured, oh, it's the flu. It's what I felt like. So I'd gone in to take a shower. And when I got out of that shower, my skin was bright red all over. Like I had laid out on the beach with no sunscreen in 90-degree temperatures. And I was freezing to death. Well, I had medication to take, liquid cough medicine. And I took it, and the moment it hit my stomach, it just came right back up. Well, at that point, I yelled for the person that was there with me, and she helped me back to the bed and covered me up with about 6 very heavy blankets. And she got really, really worried. She knew there was something wrong. So she called my mom. She said, this is enough of this shit. We're calling your mother. So my mom leaves and comes to get me. And it took her and my mother to get me down one flight of stairs and into my mom's vehicle. Well, I got to the hospital, and I will tell you what I remember because, they gave me a lot of medicine after this, and it took away some of my memory. But they got me back into a trauma room, one with a curtain where it was easy access. And they stuck me 8 times to get an IV. Well, they took a bunch of blood and apparently a urine sample. I don't remember giving that, and I wasn't cathed, so we're just going to go with I gave it. But my veins were rolling, and some of them had partially collapsed. I guess I laid there for quite a while, and I just slept. I remember it being very, very bright in there. But when my blood work came back, my hemoglobin was 8, and the average for a grown woman is 12 to 16 units, and I had 8 in my body. Now remember, in August I told you I had come in and they did blood work, the same hospital, my hemoglobin was normal. So in 3 months, I had lost between 4 and 6 units of blood. And it apparently was coming out through my kidneys, because that's the color of my urine indicated blood. Well, they also did some anti-nuclear antibody tests on me. And you're not supposed to test positive for any of them. I tested positive for all 15. At that point, these people that had watched me grow up from birth at this hospital are pretty much telling my mother, she's dying. How's your mom supposed to handle that? You're 24 years old, almost 25. Well, I remember the nurse putting the IV in my arm, and they were just giving me bag after bag of fluids. And then I remember my mother leaning over me and patting my arm and telling me, "Baby, they're going to admit you." I didn't give a damn. Maybe my blood work had proved why I'd felt so bad for so long. So they took me up to the floor and were giving me morphine and Ativan by IV every 4 to 6 hours. And come to find out, those were comfort measures, but my mother wouldn't tell me that because she was afraid I would just give up and die. And the urine test that they did down in the emergency room indicated I was spitting 3,000 grams of protein in my urine. And it's 3 is dangerous, 3 grams. So I was in renal failure, just total renal failure. So me not knowing any of this, I had an allergic reaction to Ativan. I was everything but combative. I was cussing nurses, cussing at my mother, refusing my medication, just telling them to leave me alone and to get out of my room. And I was just going, for lack of a better term, batshit crazy right there. And all of these people have known me forever, and they knew I would never do anything like that. So they took me off of Ativan, and I was the sweetest soul that ever walked this earth. Cool, I'm not in pain, but I wanted to take a shower, and I guess I got to take a shower, but I was there for a total of 6 days, and they released me to go home. So I made it that far out of the hospital, which is something that they never thought I would do. They thought I was just going to leave in a body bag, and I'm actually really glad my mom didn't tell me that, because, at that point, what's worth fighting for, Christ, Well, since I tested positive for the anti-nuclear antibodies, they sent me to an oncologist hematologist. Well, when he took my blood the first time, my white cells were 2, which is an indicator for leukemia. I'm like, great, I feel like this because I have cancer. Whatever. What do you do at that point? You just kind of endure what they tell you. Well, he wanted to see me back in a week. And in a week, my white cells jumped from 2 to 12, which the white cells help indicate infection. So the tables completely turned from there, and they knew it was something else. They knew. And as grateful as I was to not have leukemia, I was still undiagnosed and miserable. So at that point, the oncologist hematologist referred me to a rheumatologist, which is someone who treats lupus and gout, fibromyalgia, diseases like that. And she's wonderful. This woman saved my life, and there's no repayment for it. But she did a few further tests, blood work, urine, and uh, started me on the ever popular prednisone. Everybody that's ever been on it knows it's a nightmare. I cried for 3 days because after she saw my blood work and did her own, she referred me to a nephrologist, which is a doctor that deals with kidney diseases. And he is wonderful as well. I couldn't ask for a better kidney specialist. Between the two of them, they thought that my best option at that point, because of how high my cells were, my urine results, and blood work, that I should be put on a chemotherapy drug called Cytoxin. Well, at 24 years old, not having cancer and still being on chemotherapy is not your life goal. Well, I asked them if there was anything else that they could do for me at all. I mean, anything. And they spoke together and they came up with a regimen of Cellcept and prednisone. I was up to 110 milligrams of prednisone, and I had to work my way up the scale for Cellcept. And that medication is an anti-rejection drug for kidney transplant patients. And since my body was trying to reject itself, my kidneys being the prime target, they figured, hey, let's give this a shot. It might work. Well, at this point, I had lost all this weight. I had lost muscle tone, and I was a pretty strong girl. Working in a factory, constantly on the go. And I was down to 170 pounds. And when the prednisone kicked in, I again blew up like a blimp, and my ankles were probably that big around. About as big as my face. They were 23 inches around, measuring for compression stockings. I was retaining fluid. I had 60 pounds of salt, water, and toxins that my kidneys weren't getting rid of, stored in my body. To the point that when I slept at night, I had to be propped up, or fluid that was in my chest cavity would make me feel like I was drowning, and I would gasp for air in my sleep. I would stand up in the morning, and the section of my stomach between where my legs connect to my torso and my belly button swelled up like I was in an inner tube. All the fluid was sinking, and it definitely disfigured that part of my body, and that's still a problem for me many years later. But nothing was working. I was a mess. I would call my doctor, my rheumatologist to be exact, and ask her if there was anything that we could do, because I just felt like such hell. My hair had fallen out. I had a receding hairline like a man. A strip right down the center of my head was gone. And it was just a disaster. So they decided that since my kidneys were failing and all the tests had shown that I needed to go and have a kidney biopsy done. Well, December of 2010, I was sent to a sister hospital about an hour away, and they numbed me up, and I don't know if you guys know what a pickle fork looks like. Like, you push a little button on top of it and little claws come out. Well, they stuck that down in my kidney and took a little sample of the tissue. And when it came back, I was in between stage 3 and 4 of renal failure at 24. And you imagine that hitting you like 10 tons of bricks. But at this point, I was on steroids, so I was adjusting to my new mentality. And there were many, many times I'm like, why didn't you just let me die? Going through all this. It was a mess. And that's pretty much where my 2010 went into, 24 into 25. That is what I handled. So I'm going to pick up next time with some more stuff that has to do with the prednisone and my medications and some of the other side effects from the lupus and it being active. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions for me at all, feel free to ask them. I will do a Q&A video in a little while. I'm definitely an open book about this because since it's not really heard of, it educates and it raises awareness for my condition.